Welcome, traveler. It's time to level up in fantasy football. Join Mike and Evan and a special guest as we break down a different topic every week. Roll for initiative. Let's get it going.
What is poppin', beat boppin', and skippity boop boppin'? I am Mike. You can find me on Twitter at FFMikeCash. And I am the co-host for at least the next 2 weeks. Baby's coming out, so I'm going to take a couple weeks off, and Evan's going to point guard. But I am joined by Evan, my fearless co-host. How are you tonight?
What's up, Mike? We're doing well, and just learning from the best here, trying to figure out how to run the show like a star.
Yeah, hopefully it's nice and frisky. But we have some exciting things to talk about tonight. We're going to try and get people spice up their fantasy life. And we mean fantasy football. We don't mean whatever the heck you do in your free time. Don't be weird. But let's talk a little bit first about history. And we'll talk about the history of the most important position, the one that is near and dear to our hearts. We'll talk about some offensive linemen. So, Evan, who is your favorite offensive lineman from NFL history?
Oh, 100% John Runyon and his club that he used to have on his hand. You know, there was always something going on with one of his hands, and he would always just have that thing just balled up at the end, looking like he's just going to smack people over the head with it. Absolutely loved him.
Yeah, my guy just had a weapon every time that he was going out on the field. It feels like cheating.
Very much so. How about you, Mike? What you got?
I'm going to go with, look, it's a homer pick, but I can't get him out of my head. He's a Hall of Famer. I'm going to go with Alan Faneca. On Willie Parker's 75-yard touchdown in the Super Bowl, he pulled from left to right, and he had a key block on a linebacker down the field in order to spring him. And fast Willie Parker set the record. So it was important to little Mike. It's important to big Mike. Alan Faneca is my favorite offensive lineman ever. Cool. Let's do the next part.
And now it's time for news and notes.
All right, look, it's May. There's not a lot to talk about. So we're going to talk about Nico Collins. He just signed today a 3-year, $72 million extension that includes all sorts of bonuses, all sorts of guarantees, which basically means Nico Collins is tied to CJ Stroud for the next 3 years. Evan, did this bump Nico Collins up to you, or were you already anticipating him sticking around in Houston?
No, I was already expecting an extension. Is it a little bit bigger of an extension than I was expecting? Sure. Especially considering the weapons that they already have on that offense. But absolutely love it. You know, they're locking him in with his young quarterback. Hopefully him and Tank are there for a long time, and hopefully Diggs doesn't ruin that locker room.
Man, it's going to be a real bummer if Diggs turns into the locker room cancer that he has been for a lot of his career. But I thought this was interesting because, $72 million sounds like an ungodly amount of money. It's not even like he's making less than Christian Kirk. He's making less than Terry McLaurin. He's making less than Calvin Ridley. Like, this is a pretty team-friendly deal, all things considered. So it's good for Houston. It's good for Nico. It's good for Stroud. I think there's a lot to like about this.
Yeah, I think Nico knows what he had previously produced before last season. He sees the upside being in Houston, being competitive in that division. Finally, with the Texans being potentially, most likely, the team to be in that division. Looking forward with a bright future with a quarterback that's now going into his sophomore season. He sees a lot of potential, and, I think he sees potential for some rings, potential for some championships coming in the future, or at least an argument to be made of consistent playoff berths. Mm-hmm. Players want to play playoff football, or they want to get an absolute crazy bag from a crap team just to cash out. So love the deal for him.
Yeah. It's wild. I'm poking around on wide receiver salaries for the next couple of years from over the cap. Calvin Ridley's going to make $26.7 million in 2026. AJ Brown's going to make 23.5. So
yep.
Good job, Tennessee.
Well, love that for the Titans, the current city Titans, man. And then, hey, one more thing of news and notes here. What do you think about the NFL Players Association saying that they want to potentially get rid of OTAs in a trade-off for a longer training camp?
Ooh. Full transparency, this wasn't on the news and notes, so this is right off the cuff. I am all about the players advocating for what they want. And if that's what they really want. That's fine. I think that it could lead to a little bit of a slower start in the season, like having more time to get acclimated. And like, we can talk about all of these guys are supreme athletes and they're going to get ready, but like Leonard Fournette needed the first month of the season to get in shape, and that's with the current structure. So I worry that there's going to be some players that they're used to having their schedule. They've been in the league for a while. They know that if I show up to OTAs, I can get in shape there. If I show up to training camp, I can like refine my things there. Now they're just going to have to really take care of themselves in the offseason. It'll be interesting to see the ones that put the work in, the ones that don't. What do you think?
Honestly, I'm kind of here for it. You keep hearing all of these narratives coming out of OTAs and training camp. It feels like you get more fans in there. You get more fans hyped for it. It gives more fans more chances to see the players that they want to be able to see.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives them a more continuous route. I just feel like there's these gaps between OTAs and between training camp and all of those other off-season activities that are voluntarily involuntary for teams, which is always a fun way to think about it. But yeah, I'd be completely here for it. I remember growing up, used to go over to Lehigh to go watch the Eagles for their training camp. So definitely a fan.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're not here to just talk about player stuff. We're here to get people excited and fired up for their fantasy football leagues. So
let's get into the meat and potatoes.
All right. So before we get into the league settings and things that we can do with there, I want to talk about Trophy Smack real quick. So my family league has a trophy that we pass around every single year. We play for zero money because it's friends and family and you just want to have a good time with it. But I tell you what, it gets extremely competitive come playoff time because Uncle Steve has had that trophy for 2 years in a row. I'm freaking coming for you whenever you listen to this episode. But it's a great way to build a little camaraderie, have a little longevity with it. I know you can't do it for all 45 dynasty leagues that you're in, Evan, but I would definitely recommend it for the core ones that matter, friends, family, or coworkers. It's better to get a trophy than to get a Venmo for $80.
Hey, just to be clear here, 45 is an old Evan number. I have gotten much more responsible with my dynasty gaming. We are down in the high teens. Okay.
Ooh,
thank you, sir.
Look at you. I was going to say, I thought you cut down to 42.
Hey, I hear, it's one of the perfect numbers, but what can I say?
And if a whole trophy is out of your price range, like they do rings, they do belts, they do all sorts of things. And if you do decide to go with Trophy Smack, use our code RPG at checkout and you'll get a little money off. We'll get a little money back. It's win-win. What's not to love?
And also just think about it. When you're doing your late night drafts, we start getting into redraft season closer there. You're trying to cram in as many redrafts as you can. What's better than a little bit of dubby for those late night drafts to keep you going? We're trying to keep you jitterless. We're trying to keep you able to fall asleep at a reasonable time while still being able to get in. It's underdog season right now, Mike, right?
Yeah.
Underdog drafts are going crazy. What do you need to be able to get that late night haul? Maybe be on the East Coast trying to draft against some West Coasters that may have some team biases, that you want to try and destroy. Why not have a little bit of W and use code FFRPG at checkout for a little bit of cash off?
Heck yeah. Baby on the way. I'm loading up on W. But let's dive into the real exciting stuff. So, Evan, you want to run through what? So, a lot of people think about fantasy football leagues or their dynasty fantasy football leagues. Like, what is a standard league that you would expect when somebody just says, hey, I want to join a dynasty league?
Yeah, so, tonight we're going to be talking about some RPG leagues and just some special settings in them to try and spice it up, as the title suggests. What kind of makes it outside of just the vanilla league? So for me, when I think of a vanilla dynasty league at this point, I'm thinking a start 10. It's going to be a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 3 flexes, and then a super flex. It's going to be a lineup league, not a best ball. It's going to be a snake startup. Typically, it's going to be a 3rd round reversal, which for those of you that don't understand, 3rd round reversal, basically you go through the first 2 rounds, and then whoever had the first pick in the second starts the 3rd round, and then that just starts over your new snake. Scoring-wise, standard league, what I'm thinking about is 1 point for 25 passing yards, 6 points for a passing touchdown, -2 points for an interception. Rushing wise, we're talking 1 point for 10 yards, 6 points for a touchdown, -2 for a fumble, just a generic fumble, whether it's lost or retained by the offense. Receiving wise, we're talking 1 point for 10 yards, 6 points for a receiving touchdown. Tight ends, I'm used to tight end premiums. So it's a point per reception as standard for receiver, running back, and then also a 0.5 bonus for a tight end reception. So each reception for a tight end is 1.5 points.
Yeah.
Like any thoughts on that standard?
Yeah. I want to anchor down on the 6 point versus the 4 point passing touchdown. So 4 point passing touchdown, it really favors those rushing quarterbacks. Like Justin Fields is going to be able to be a top 5 fantasy scorer every time that he touches the ball because he has such elite rushing upside. By adding the 6 point passing touchdown, now you're talking about the CJ Strouds, the Joe Burrows, like a guy that's not going to bring as much on the ground might be able to bring a little bit more output there. The 1.5 tight end premium, Evan, what do you think that does for tight end valuation? Like, does the tight end 12 all of a sudden become flex worthy? Like, are you talking about starting 2 of these guys, or is that a small enough premium that it doesn't really rustle your jimmies that much?
Yeah, so for me, the 1.5 is a small enough premium that I'm not typically looking at them in my flex. Typically, I'm looking at running backs, wide receivers in the flex position, fully expecting it. But it is a big enough difference that it really differentiates those top target earners and top reception target tight ends. The guys that are hyper utilized in their offenses, talking the Evan Ingrams, pushes him up in redraft and dynasty, talking the Kelseys, the Andrews, Laportas, McBrides, those guys that are getting a lot of targets in their offenses rather than just a generic usage saying somebody getting 80 and under targets. Those guys that are getting that over 80 threshold really boost them up.
Yep. Fun fact, even with just a 0.5 tight end premium, Evan Ingram was the tight end 1 last year by like a comfortable margin. So pretty fun.
There we go.
It also makes him extremely valuable. Let's dive a little bit into what the RPG leagues are. So these are just examples of some leagues that have some spicy stuff that maybe the listeners at home would want to implement. But let's talk about Barbarians first. So this is really exciting because it adds a kick and punt return option. And then do you want to talk about some of the other settings that it does and how those impact your player values or who you would be targeting in startup drafts?
Yeah, so, we didn't talk about a generic bench, but when I think of a 10 lineup, I'm usually thinking of a generic 12-ish bench, 10 to 12, smaller rosters, more condensed for your everyday fantasy gamer that's trying to really get into dynasty gaming. So Barbarians is really cool. It's also a start 10, but it is 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. So you're adding an additional premium on the tight end position, 1 flex. And it's one of the few leagues that we have that's actually a single quarterback. So it's a single quarterback league because we made the boosted quarterback point scoring. So instead of being 1 point for every 25 passing yards, it's 1 point for 2 passing yards.
It gets ridiculous.
Which is crazy because you think, single quarterback, just fade the quarterbacks to oblivion. Well, the fact that they're scoring so many points and the passing yards are there, it starts to kind of whittle down the efficiency of rushing quarterbacks and really pushes it more to passing quarterbacks, the guys that are going for those 4,500, 5,000 yard plus seasons that are really going to score you tons and tons of points passing the football around. It also gives a 0.5 point per passing first down, which is huge in its own right. So we thought of the concept of taking a super flex, which most of us play in these days, and let's go back to the 1 QB format that has been there for years and is what most people grew up playing redraft fantasy football with. And let's just boost the crap out of quarterback scoring and just see what it does to the league. Yep. So it was really good in a building mechanic to see how you can change from a super flex, but still value quarterbacks relatively similar to how you do in super flex leagues.
What's wild with this? Tua Tagovailoa scored almost the scoring's already boosted, but he scored 450 more points than Lamar Jackson on yards alone.
Yeah.
Touchdowns, it gets weird, but just it's a fun way to get quarterbacks boosted without making it a super flex and everybody's just itching for them. So what does that do? When we're talking about kick and punt returns, this is something that's pretty standard across RPG leagues. We'd love to just throw in a little bit of a curveball, and this is an easy one to do. It's 1 point for every 5 yards for your kick and punt and 6 points for a touchdown, which 6 points for a touchdown should be standard. We should give players points for scoring. Like now you know names like Kene Nwangwu or Rashid Shaheed, or like insert your favorite. Cordero Patterson might be relevant in the year of our Lord 2024. Like, where would those players go compared to other players?
Yeah, so those players are typically going to be your guys that end up being the flex option for you, or your RB3, or, you know, some guy that you're kind of taking a dart throw on. So say you're looking for that high volatility player in your lineup, the guy that could just absolutely pop that week, gets a 100-yard kick return for a touchdown. Well, a 100-yard kick return for a touchdown, immediately you're talking 26 points right there. But the Barbarians League kind of nerfs that by the fact that they give so many points. So this is a high scoring point league. This is for the dynasty player that wants to be able to feel good about seeing this giant number that their team really scored, because going into that, rushing 1 point for every 2 yards, receiving 1 point for every 2 yards. So this is one of the RPG leagues where the kick return is not as valuable. So that's really why I'm kind of looking at those like heavy kick returners. The perfect example of this would have been Tony Pollard the year that he was still the kick returner and the RB2, where that is really where it comes in as a giant benefit. Right. So you're looking for those guys that are going to get the workload as a wide receiver 2 in an offense, or an RB2 in an offense, and then also be able to get boosted from those kick return and punt return yardage.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. We have all sorts of different leagues we want to talk about and what it will do to our strategy. Let's move on down a little bit. So the RPG Dragons League, this is an Empire League where you'll start 11. Most of the scoring is pretty reasonable. But what does Empire mean? And then how does that impact like some of your strategy? We've talked about, if people haven't listened, go back and listen to how to rebuild. We've gone back and said how to push the chips in. An Empire League almost separates those even more. Like now you're worried about somebody winning it a couple of years in a row. So explain what that means.
Yeah, so an Empire League is a fun little wrinkle on everything, because if you win back-to-back titles, you win the Empire pot. So basically you're taking some of the dues. In this case, it is a $10 yearly due, and then an additional $5 for the Empire pot. So it's a $15 due, and then you're paying into the Empire pot every year. Whoever wins the league in back-to-back years not only wins that year's first place prize, but also wins the Empire pot. And when you win the Empire pot, it resets the entire league back to a brand new startup. So it's a way to kind of keep it fresh, try and make sure that you don't get a team that is going to absolutely ransack the entire league, a team that's going to run away with it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, just have so many assets that it makes it just unbearable to the point where you basically created a league breaker. This league, one thing to note in it is that there's only 5 bench slots, which is really interesting from a team building standpoint. But the wrinkle that we added is you actually add 3 bench slots every year of the league. So first year, there's only 5 bench slots. Second year, there's 8. If the team didn't back-to-back win it, now there's 11, then there's 14, then there's 17. So all of a sudden, as the league gets longer and longer, you get a much deeper and deeper bench to be able to take those shots on players. But at the very beginning, it's really critical because you only have 5 bench slots. So what does that do, Mike, for your mindset when you're looking at this saying, okay, it's a quarterback, 3 running backs, 3 wide receivers, start 2 tight ends, a flex and a super flex?
Yeah, so with the super shallow bench, I'm almost looking at just really hammering even more so than normal. The 2 tight end and super flex makes you want to hit quarterback and tight end extremely early. people sleep on the advantage of having 2 elite tight ends in that format. And then I really want to hit the wide receivers that are going to have the longevity and they can sit there and like anchor my roster. With how few bench slots there are early, now you're able to go grab that handcuff. Like when an injury goes down, you blow all of your fab, you go get a Jerome Ford, you go get a Gus Edwards, you go get whatever you need. And now you're able to fill in your running back positions via like the waiver wire, as opposed to having to draft a Breece Hall early in order to get that competitive advantage. So that's where my mind goes with that. Does your mind go somewhere else, or is that about the right?
So remind me again, what did you say about quarterbacks here? So
yeah, I would hit those early as well. Just
are you rostering 3 though?
Ideally you can go get a backup quarterback. If your quarterback goes down, people aren't rostering them. Like this isn't a 30 bench dynasty. Like I just dropped Bailey Zappi today and it broke my heart. Like there's just not room for that. So you're able to go get a backup. You might even be able to go get a low end QB3. Just Derek Carr might be floating around on the waiver wire. So
yeah, so it's really interesting to think about, because when I'm thinking about this, I'm saying, okay, I have to start 2 tight ends every week. So I'm 100% with you. I'm seeing that there are very few viable tight ends that I really want to be starting week in and week out. And I'm taking 2 relatively early shots on them. I'm working on figuring out wide receiver and running back later, and I'm drafting my 2 quarterbacks if I can get them. And basically building through those 2 positions and then trying to figure out the rest of it. I think I'll only be rostering 2 quarterbacks though, while I still think that I'll be rostering 3 tight ends. I'll be using one of those 5 bench slots on a 3rd tight end.
Yeah. I think the 3rd tight end is going to look real gross real quick. Like if everybody has to start 2, your 3rd tight end's probably not, it's not even a Chico Conquo. We're looking at like Tyler Conklin or Danny Bellinger. But if you're able to get 3 early, that can give you a competitive advantage. With an Empire League, this completely shifts our ideas of how to rebuild. So when we're talking about rebuilding, you're talking about selling assets, making the future available, and then trying to build like through all of these draft darts. You're going to hit on enough of them that they're able to help you. Now, if the year like guy wins 2 years in a row and you've just been accumulating 2027 firsts, you wasted your time and your money. Are you looking to just push all the chips in almost every single year? Or how does your mindset change with that?
Yeah, so the way that I'm looking at it, typically when I play in Empire Leagues, typically 12 team, forgot to mention that as typical standard at this point. So when I'm looking at a 12 team Empire League, if I go into the offseason saying, okay, there are 3 teams that I think I can win it, having the thought of 3 of the 12 that can win it is enough for me, even if one of those 3 has won it before, to just tear everything down and be able to work from it. I'm willing to take that risk if there is at least 25% of the league that I think that can win it.
Yeah.
That's my theory on it, though.
That checks. I wouldn't be willing to trade with the guy that is in the running to win it back-to-back if my team is good.
Sure.
If my team's bad, I might just be like, hey, brother, give me your first next year and I'll give you my running back. And like, let's see, either you win it and it resets and I get another shot, or I have your first and now I can look to 2025 and beyond. So I think the only teams that should be willing to trade with the really good teams in Empire League should be the really, really bad ones with no hope of winning anytime soon. But let's move on down the list. Let's talk about some Dynasty Best Ball for the freaks and the sheets. Like, this isn't for the faint of heart. This is a little spooky. I did my first Dynasty Best Ball last summer, and I got absolutely rocked. But I used our rebuilding principles to get Caleb Williams, Xavier Worthy, and some other fun players. So looking like 2025 and 2024 might be a little bit better. So RPG Dwarves, it's 11 in the lineup with 15 bench slots. You have 1 quarterback with a super flex, a running back, 2 wide receivers, and then just a bunch of weird flexes. Like you can flex 4, and then there's 2 that are only wide receiver or tight end. So really, like you have 6 flex spots. It's getting a little tricky there. And then you also give these bonuses for big plays. So if a player gets a 40-yard completion, they get a 3-point bonus. If they get a 40-yard touchdown, they get a 3-point bonus. If they get a 40-yard rush, it's a bonus. Like bonus, 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 Are you big game hunting the guys like Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill, or are you looking just for volume and hopefully they stumble into a big play every once in a while?
Yeah, so for me, I'm looking at it as a big play hunting when it comes to running back and wide receiver specifically. When I'm looking at tight ends, I'm still looking at volume for tight ends. I'm not really caring too much about giant plays. Quarterbacks, once again, I'm still not really caring too much about big plays at quarterbacks. At the quarterback position. I just think the big plays from a running back and a wide receiver, when you stack an additional 6 points on top of, say, a 50-yard Achane rush, okay, now we're talking about an 11-point play. If he doesn't score a touchdown, we're talking about a 17-point play. If he does score a touchdown, I mean, that's huge. One play, 17 points potential. Because it's 3 points on top of the 6 that you already get for the touchdown. So, yeah, when I'm looking at that. And then the other thing to mention, this Dwarves League is a full point premium for tight ends. So each tight end reception is 2 points, which is huge when you think about it. Really bumps up the viability of additional tight ends. Makes those mid-range tight ends a little bit more valuable, makes them potential flex plays. When you think of it from a best ball standpoint, now all of a sudden you have a tight end that has a 5-reception game. Well, that's 10 points just on receptions right there alone. So the chance of him making your lineup at that point significantly goes up. And then the other thing that I really appreciate about this league is it's a tiered PPR based on the yardage of the reception, which I thought was a really cool setting, really cool way to spice this up. Yeah. So just to break this down for the listeners here, 0 to 4 yards on the reception, you get a 0.1 bonus. So this is only a half PPR league. So each reception is only half a point, but you get each one of these bonuses on top of that half a point for the reception. So 0 to 4 is 0.1, 5 to 9 is 0.5, 10 to 19 is one whole extra point. So it'd be 1.5 plus the yardage on top of it for that reception. 20 to 29 is 2 points. 30 to 39 is 3 points. 40 plus is 4 points. So this really plays into the how do you want your wide receivers used? How do you want them to be utilized in the offense? Do you want those guys like a Malachi Corley that's probably going to be getting a lot of receptions right by the line of scrimmage? Or do you want those guys like Xavier Worthy that are just running a go route downfield, trying to be able to take advantage of that?
Yeah, this gets rid of the videos where it's somebody, they say just 2 guys scoring 1 point and it's just a receiver catching a screen pass and getting tackled immediately, and then a running back breaking 17 tackles in order to do it. So love to see that. I think it makes a ton of sense, and I might integrate tiered PPR in some of my own fantasy leagues because I think it's a lovely idea.
All right. Awesome, Mike. And then just real quick for the people at home here, best ball. How does that change your team building standpoint?
Yes. So what you want to do in a best ball league, and Underdog has all sorts of good articles out about it. I'm probably going to drop one here in the coming weeks about, ideal builds and what you can do with that. But in a super flex league, we talk about normally having 3 quarterbacks. That way, if a quarterback gets hurt, you can bring another one in. I would almost consider carrying 4 quarterbacks if you can. Obviously, not everybody can have 4 quarterbacks in a 12-person league. Like, grab a bench quarterback. Like, grab some really good depth. Make sure that you're able to fill all of those slots with players that are scoring enormous points week to week. And we talked about big game hunting because of the bonuses, but now we're talking about adding big game hunters because of its best ball. If Achane goes off like he did against the Broncos, you immediately start him. But you don't have to worry about the weeks that he stinks. So now I'm looking for a little more high risk and a little more high reward, looking for the deep ball receivers. I'm looking for the running backs that can break one long one instead of some of those volume plotters that I know Najee Harris is going to give me 10 points. I don't care about the 10 points. I want the random spike week from the bench wide receiver.
You want the Gabe Davis 25-point week instead of the Gabe Davis 2-point week.
I want Gabe Davis on my best ball rosters because he's going to catch a deep one. And this would change rookie rankings. So now we're talking about moving Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy up. We're talking about maybe moving Brock Bowers a little bit down because of the tiered PPR. There's a big tight end premium. But there's like a little bit more nuance with it, and you have to look at, based on historical data with each of these league settings, you want to look at what did this do in the 2 years prior, which players came out on top, and which ones had, I think he used to go by Djibouti Puns. It's Bradley Stalder over at Roto Baller or Roto World, one of the other ones, player profiler. But you want to find the guys that have good best ball ratings. You can start them when they're good, and when they're bad, it doesn't matter because it's best ball. So there are players that consistently get 10 points. That is absolutely useless in a best ball league. So go get you some big game hunters, some big game receivers. Does that sound about right?
Rashid Shaheed, baby.
Rashid Shaheed. Cool. Let's move on down.
Love it. Yep.
MVS. He finally gets a good quarterback. Can we talk about a player that has had arguably 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks that has done less than MVS?
Hey, he's just making checks, cashing them, and going out there dropping balls. So
my guy's making more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime, runs faster than I could ever dreamed of, but he plays wide receiver and can't catch the ball. Let's talk about RPG Goblins real quick. So it is a 10 lineup with points for completions, but minus points for incompletions. So we're talking about trying to find those efficient quarterbacks. Rushing, you get points for rush attempts, you get points for rushing first downs, you get the other big game bonuses. We're talking about 1 point for 40 yards on a rushing attempt and 1 point for a 40-yard rushing touchdown. So now it's a 7-point touchdown. And you're getting bonus if they get 20-plus rush attempts, which workhorses are still hiding around out there. Shout out to Breece Hall. Receiving, everybody gets 1.5 PPR, so that gets spooky. 1.5 for tight end, and that goes back to the tiered bonus, and then with a little bit of kick and punt return sprinkled on top. I know that was a lot to digest really quickly, but really, Evan, the key thing here I want to hammer down on, because we've already talked about a lot of this, the completion versus incompletion for passing. How would you attack the quarterback position in this Superflex league?
Yeah, so in this Superflex league specifically, also seeing that there is a rushing first down, a full point for a rushing first down. I absolutely love the rushing quarterbacks. When I was pulling up the quarterbacks in this league from last year, you look at the top 4 guys in points scored in this league. It was Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. 3 of those guys are 4 of the highest rushing quarterbacks in the league. The points per first down for rushing comes in absolutely clutch for quarterbacks. You look at Anthony Richardson, and his point per game in this league was very high as well. So these are all things that are definitely playing into my thought process. You look at Dak, good old Dakota, out here, just completion, just being a high percentage thrower of the football, and it elevated him. I mean, we're talking about a guy that was second in the quarterback points scored from last year. Absolutely loved it. So it's definitely a fun wrinkle to think about, because it really makes those back end quarterback threes. You really have to think about them, because what type of quarterback are you going for? And it almost makes me less willing and less desirable to try and hold some of those guys and then just play it risky. Just try and find a way to get those 2 hammers and just say, look, if they get hurt, it is what it is. Those weeks, I'm done. Just kind of is what it is, and I'll move on from the league for this year, and just say, all right, throwing in the towel. I'm going to start somebody in the Superflex position that's not going to score me nearly as many points as the quarterback typically would, and I'll get a high draft pick and be able to go from there. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah. So how did this impact Brock Purdy and Tua Tagovailoa? I'm looking at completion percentages and completions versus attempts. Like Tua had 388 completions on the 5th highest passing percentage.
Yeah, so Tua was 9th overall at the quarterback position.
Sounds like
in this league.
If you want to make efficient quarterbacks part of your league, you need to add a point per completion and negative points per incompletion. We actually had a great little comment here from Justin. Justin, thank you so much for listening. He's been trying to add a point per carry to his dynasty league for years. Tell me, what is the case to adding a point per carry, and what would this do to your strategy?
Yeah, so the point per carry is basically a way to combat the argument that workhorses and running backs in as a whole position, running backs are being devalued in fantasy football right now. So how do we bring back the availability of running backs, make running backs more valuable? Well, let's add a point per carry. Let's add points for rushing first downs. Let's add things to be able to quote unquote artificially boost the value of running backs because so many teams are going to committee backfields. So many teams are splitting workloads in the backfield. So if you get that running back, the one in the few, you look at the number of times last year that Saquon had 25 plus rush attempts. I mean, that makes him a workhorse back. And those are the kind of guys that get the benefit of a point per carry being added to your league.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Also, fun little wrinkle with this, that would make Deebo Samuel go from the wide receiver 15 to the wide receiver 8 last year. And that's not including any rushing first downs or any fun stuff like that. It would also bump. I mean, CeeDee Lamb would have gone from wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 1 even more. Rondale Moore might have become a little relevant because he's getting 28 carries, which would move him from wide receiver 66 to, man, I got to scroll all the way down for this. Let's add 28 to that. It would move him up to 50. So like now he becomes a feasible flex option. So adding a carry, it just adds another layer of strategy, another layer of paying attention, and maybe it moves away from your guy that didn't really pay attention. Now he just got lucky to now there's strategy and nuance, and it just makes the game a little bit more fun. So add a point per carry if you're a real freak in the sheets. Cool. Anything else on goblins, or you want to keep on trucking down to paladins, which is one that I'm really passionate about, and I think this is a great one.
Yeah, so I mean, the only other thing about goblins is, once again, it's a tiered bonus league. And this one's actually 1.5 reception bonus for tight ends. So that makes tight ends even that much more valuable, on top of the fact that it's a 2 tight end, so start 2 tight end league. So now we're making tight ends uber valuable. We're going to KTC. We're bumping that plus all the way up. We're doing that tight end plus over there. You know, really trying to say, what can we do to be able to have tight ends be valued consistently? And when I'm pulling up just the flex points from last season, Evan Ingram was the number 4 point scorer of non-quarterbacks in this league last year.
Oh, yeah. And I bet he was actually pretty high even compared to some of the quarterbacks just because of the nasty bonuses. Oh, hi, Joey. Thanks for saying hi. It's good to see you, buddy. Let's move on down to Paladins, which it gives some special rules, which are super cool. So you can add, I'm just going to skip all the way down. It's a super flex, normal dynasty league. You get a couple of cool things with that. But you can revive a team player. So if somebody gets injured in the game, you can add a bench player that hasn't been played yet, and you can do this 3 times during the season. So you get 3 revives. Or you can smite. So you choose one player from the opposing team and half their points. So now you're looking across and you're just staring Christian McCaffrey in the eyes. You're looking at him, you're like, man,
on Monday Night Football,
I don't want to deal with that. So then you smite him, and now he only scores 40 points instead of 80 points. Or you can revive somebody. Like, it always stinks when you get injury. You get the weird T. Higgins, like he was hurt, but he played, but he didn't play. Like, now you can replace him with somebody that hasn't played yet and maybe save your week. How would this change your strategy? Are you more likely to like push the limits with some questionable players, or are you still erring on the side of caution?
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm more willing to take a shot on an Anthony Richardson, more willing to take a shot on a Lamar, who tends to get hurt more often, a Debo, guys of that nature, guys that, you know, I know are going to be very high point per game. Tank Dell as another example, very high point per game output players, but tend to end up getting hurt in a game. Mike, you make an absolute just fantastic point here. When you lose a player on your fantasy team that you started that week in the first quarter of a game, how demoralizing is it? You're just staring at a 2 point on your roster, maybe even a -2, you know,
or
maybe
Aaron Rodgers, and he's out for the whole season,
or Aaron Rodgers, and he's just out, you know, on the very, you know, one of the first couple snaps of the game, you know, really early. And you're saying, well, crap. Okay. Think about that. Who do I need to replace him? Now, I will say the one caveat is if you have a quarterback or any other position, you can't switch him into the super flex to replace, if that is a quarterback, you can't replace the quarterback and then switch that over. So that's something to also remember. If your position is hurt, say quarterback, and you don't have a QB3, you can't really do anything with that because you won't be rostering another quarterback at that point. And it's also really nice because it helps the earlier games to try and keep fantasy managers involved in the week longer, which is always something that I've seen in leagues. Like teams just kind of check out, oh, my team had a really crappy 12 o'clock Central Time here and 3 o'clock. Do I really care about Sunday Night Football? Do I really care about Monday Night Football when I'm down 120 points or something crazy like that and I have a 1% chance of winning? It keeps fantasy managers involved in the league chat, talking more. You start to see, oh, okay, somebody just got hurt. It keeps you watching the games because if you don't know that a player got hurt, how am I going to know to tell the commissioner, hey, I want to swap this guy out and use my revive? Obviously, these rules are for non-playoff games. Obviously, it doesn't work in playoffs. But the smite, we've seen the smite be used very diligently in a Monday night game where it's a very close point total. And you need that Monday night player to be able to get a half of what they would put out to be able to get the win. So it's one people weeks, things of that nature.
I want people to picture this. It's week 13. You're trying to push to the playoffs. You are one win away from the playoffs, and you see CeeDee Lamb on the opposing team, and they're heading into Monday Night Football, and you're only up 15. And you're like, there's no way this is going to happen. And then you use a smite, you talk all of the talk in the league chat, and then CeeDee Lamb, he gets an early touchdown. He's up almost at the line, and now you're really itching the. Think about all of the excitement that this can bring. So I'm going to try to add a little bit of smite to maybe my friends' league, some of my family leagues, a little bit of coworker stuff. I just think it's a fun little nugget and wrinkle that a lot of people don't use. And this is only useful if you have a good commissioner. So this 100%. Is important. Like Corey used to be on the show. He was a little busy tonight. Otherwise, he was going to come talk about all of his babies. But if you have a good commissioner, you can have rules like this, like smiting or reviving, that will allow you to just really have a blast with your leagues, as opposed to just setting 30 lineups and then watching and drinking a beer and be like, man, I won 14 of them. That stinks. That's not fun. So let's dive into our last little bit, talk a little bit more about Trophy Smack and Dubby, and then call it a night. So we have RPG Rogues. Evan, I'm going to let you run through this one because there is too much here for me to handle.
Okay, Mike, I got you. So this is a lineup league. It has 10 bench slots. So it's a little shallow on the bench slots to be able to work with for team building here. You got a quarterback, 2 running backs, only 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 2 flexes, and a super flex. We're looking at 40-plus yards, so big plays once again. So passing 40-plus yard TDs is now 6 points instead of 4 or 3 as it was previously. 40-yard completions are an additional 4. So now all of a sudden you have a quarterback, say he makes a 50-yard completion. Well, that's 2 yards, 2 points just on yardage alone. It's another 4 points. So now all of a sudden you have a 6-point play instead of just a 2-point play. As it typically would be. But quarterbacks also get penalized because of these big plays. Now, all of a sudden, an interception is going to be a 4-point loss. So we're doubling the amount that an interception costs you, which really makes you start to think about, okay, Josh Allen chucking the ball downfield. We love to see that because we're getting these 40-plus point chunk plays, but he's also throwing a bunch of interceptions. So how does that start to balance things out? To be able to look at that cost-benefit analysis. Yep. When rushing, we're talking fumbles in this league. Whether you lose it or not is minus 2 points. And then if your team loses it and you don't recover the fumble, it's another 2 points that are lost. So you could potentially lose 4 points on a fumble. That's a fun little wrinkle as well. Once again, rushing also has the 40-yard 4 points, and 40-yard touchdown for 6 points. Receiving has the same bonus, 40 and 40 for 4 and 6. And then tight ends have a full point premium. But the thing that really sets this league apart here is the 5 points, or 1 point per 5 yards for kick return and punt returns, along with an 8-point touchdown. All right. So now all of a sudden we're not doing 6 point, we're doing 8 points. So now you start looking at these guys. Okay. Once again, we go back to is there a running back 2 on a team that's also their kick returner? Is there a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 that's also a kick returner? Because you start thinking about, okay, this new kickoff rule, how's this going to play into it? We're going to probably see more kick returns happening this year. So you're going to see more total yardage from kick returners this year alone. So we'll really be able to digest how that rule change is going to impact a lot of these leagues that have all of these kick return points coming into the season. I know in another one, it's just absolutely blown out the water. Another RPG league, it's blown out the water with kick return points. And last year, it was a boom or bust. People were taking wide receivers as their kick returners, and then everything else, they were just stacking up like a regular team. So these kick return points are really interesting. You need to make sure to balance it so that you don't overcompensate for kick return. We did have one RPG league that was running that absolutely just blew up because of the kick return points. We're talking like a Cordero Patterson in his prime, just being like the wide receiver 2.
Breaking fantasy.
Yeah, it basically just kind of breaking how the league was supposed to run. So that was obviously a mistake, and we continued to learn from it, continued to refine what we were doing in the leagues. So I think there's some really cool wrinkles, and hopefully some people now are thinking about their leagues. Commissioners, hopefully you're listening to this thinking, what kind of wrinkles can I try and add to try and make teams think about their roster construction a little bit differently, make how players get valued rather than just a vanilla dynasty league. You can actually start valuing players a little bit differently, making teams actually have to think, because what do dynasty gamers love to do? They love to think of better strategies than the rest of their teammates.
Yeah. Fun thing about kick return and punt return yards. I just pulled up all-purpose yards, which includes kick return, punt return, rushing, and receiving. Actually, I don't think it includes receiving. No, allegedly it does, but it doesn't include just wide receivers. Rashid Shaheed, more than Bijan Robinson. Xavier Gibson, neck and neck with George Pickens. Marvin Mims and Tyjae Spears, head and shoulders above Tank Dell. Now you're having Keyshawn Nixon, the kick and punt returner for Green Bay, is almost as valuable as Christian Kirk. Now you're having to dive a layer deeper, and anytime you can add a layer, now you're getting exciting. This would keep Dameon Pierce alive and well in your dynasty leagues. RIP to him. But yeah, this was a great conversation. This is hilarious back to back. They just got rid of DST for IDP. Love IDP. If you're checking out IDP, go listen to @the PPR show. It is a friend of ours. He absolutely crushes it. He is the IDP guru in my life. And then Justin can't get rid of kickers and DSTs. So that's tough, buddy. Tell him to listen to the show. Abolish kickers. Our home league got rid of kickers for a second tight end, which is hilarious because it's still a standard league. So we don't have PPR, but we have 2 tight ends.
Look, I convinced one of my leagues to get rid that had defense and kickers to just get rid of kickers and add a second defense. And then the following year, I got them to get rid of a defense. So we were down to 1 defense. It's little bites at a time. You just got to work on them incrementally, and you can slowly work on the league.
Yeah. But thank you very much to our listeners at home. You can find me on Twitter at FFMikeCash with a K. Evan is running the show Twitter, so you can find him at FFRPGPod. If you ever have dynasty questions, fantasy questions, redraft, life questions, we love to hear about what is going on in your lives. Tweet at us. We might read it on the show, and we'll have a great time with it. Trophy Smack. It rules. Add a trophy to your home league. Add a trophy to your fantasy leagues. Use code RPG at checkout. You get a little dollar back. It's a good time for you. Good time for us. And Evan loves Dubby. He's addicted to it. It's all he drinks now. I can't get him to stop. But there's no jitters, so like there's no reason to not.
Look, Mike, you know I love my water, and a little something extra that I can add to it that just helps me out. I mean, why not?
It's the perfect amount of caffeine to get through your day. I love it. Thank you very much for having this conversation, and I hope everybody is going to add a new setting. Tweet at us and let us know what new settings you want to add to your leagues. Have a lovely night. Bye-bye.